Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Web Programming with Python and JavaScript. Today, we're joined by some special guests from GitHub and Travis, which you recall we've been using in order to do version control in CI and CD. And they'll be here today to continue those conversations about what we can use version control in CI and CD for. And so first up, we have John from GitHub, who's joined us today to talk to us about how we can use GitHub in order to work on our web applications.
I'm looking forward to spending some time with you, building some cool features. So just an overview of what we're going to do today. I'm going to walk through the development flow that we use at GitHub to work on web applications. So we're primarily a software as a service company. We build web apps. So I'm going to walk you through kind of like what a typical day would look like for me in working on some Ruby on Rails code for GitHub Classroom. So GitHub Classroom, as you probably already know, is an application for teachers and for students to use GitHub for learning how to code. And I think you're using it in CS50 already, or in this course. So yeah, let's get started. The first thing that I'm going to do is just hop into GitHub and go to the repository. This is the GitHub Classroom repository. So it's an open source code, Ruby on Rails app. You can see there's different stuff going on here. You can watch it. There's a bunch of stars. All the code is down here. And then you can check out the README. If you're interested in developing, getting involved in open source, I chose this project because it is an open source project. I'm a maintainer on this project. And if you're interested, you can send a pull request, open issues, and I'll be able to interact with you. Also, it's great because it's open source. I can easily use it as an example here. This code powers a website, GitHub Classroom, which, if we log out here, is just a tool for creating programming exercises and distributing them to students or people in your course to do coding exercises on GitHub. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through the process of developing a feature using Git, making a branch, running our unit tests, sharing with our peers, getting feedback via pull request, deploying to production, and also doing something that we call like feature flipping. Which is an approach to bringing out features to a live production application and slowly rolling them out over time or to specific people. So the first thing that we need to do, and you can kind of follow along with this. I'm probably going to move too fast for you to keep up, but I want this to be kind of a tutorial of like what you could do on your own time. So the first thing to do here is in the top right-hand corner of the repository, there's a fork button. And if you go ahead and click that, it will let you create a copy of the repository in your personal account. I've already done that. So if I go to my browser and just type in my username here, you'll see that I have a fork. It says forked from Education Classroom. So this is the public open source main repository. And I have a copy of this repository in my personal GitHub account. Then what you would do from there is go to this clone button right here and click on that and just grab the URL and hop over to your terminal. In your terminal, you would do git clone and paste in that URL. So now you can get a copy of the repository on your local machine with all the code for the app so you can run it locally and get started. I've already cloned it just for the speed of this demo. So if I move into my source repository location, we can go ahead and run git status. And you can see that I have the master branch. Everything is working. And if you want to look at the files, there's all these files and gems and cool stuff in here. We follow a pattern on our repositories of scripting everything. So we want it to be, for a new contributor coming to our project, be really easy to set up. So within the project, there's actually this file in the scripts directory. So in here, we've got script. And inside there, we have a file called Bootstrap. You run that, and it will just set up your entire machine. The only prerequisite for this app is to have Docker installed. So you install Docker on your machine, you run script Bootstrap, and you should be off to the races to get this running locally. In my case, I'm just going to go ahead and run script server. So after you've set everything up, you launch the server. You can see Docker is booting up the different services and different containers. And then if things go well, we'll have a locally running version of the application. Takes just a moment. So So there we go. It says it's done. It's starting the Docker services. Connection succeeded. And if we switch over to our browser, I'll put this over here, put the browser over here. We can do HTTP localhost 5000. Once that finishes loading up, you can see the different services running and putting out their output. And then the Rails server's running. Now it's loading. Great. So we have a locally running copy of the application. Doesn't look like much right here. It's just a landing page. So we'll go ahead and sign in and just see how it works. You can see a lot of stuff happening in the background in my console. But basically what's happening is it's connecting to my GitHub account, and it's logging me in as my user on GitHub on this application. And it shows this is kind of what the teacher sees when they're using GitHub Classroom. It's kind of overview of all their classrooms. It shows them what students they have, what assignments they've created, who submitted what when. And we're just going to add like a really simple feature. We're going to go ahead and add a link to Harvard CS50 in the navigation. So we're not going to do any actual programming. We're just going to add a little bit of HTML as a sample of how this process works. Now, we're going to, once we dive into the code, we're going to use the feature branch, a feature branch development strategy. So at GitHub, and commonly on teams that work on software as a service, web applications, it's very common to kind of take your project, make a branch, do a little bit of development off to the side, just on one specific feature, and then merge it back into master, where the master branch, the main line of development for your project, represents production. That's what we do on GitHub Classroom. The master branch is what's in production. We do a single feature branch, and we go off to the side, and we do some work, and then we merge it back in, and we deploy it right away. So this is the idea of continuous deployment. We can deploy GitHub.com hundreds of times a day. We use the same flow on GitHub.com, but I use this as the example because it's open source. A different way of doing this is kind of release-based development. And I think this is really common in desktop applications or any kind of software that goes in a package and is shipped out. Something you might see like version 1.0, version 2.0, version 3.0 of the software. And generally what happens in those cases is you have like a main line of development. You branch off for a new release. And you'll say like this is the 1.0 branch. And your developers will be just putting lots of stuff into the 1.0 branch. And eventually that 1.0 branch might get merged back into master. But in the meantime, there could be a 1.1 branch started, so that you can simultaneously be working on the upcoming release and like maybe one release down the road for 6 months later. But in our case, I'm going to focus just on this feature branch development mode, where we just make one branch for each feature or one branch for each bug report, and we merge that in and just kind of keep going. So I'm going to open up another terminal. And you'll see that I have my repository clone down locally. On the right-hand side of my terminal, that just says what branch I'm on and the current status of my repository if I ran git status. So every time I do something, that will automatically update. And the first step here is to get onto another branch. We need to make a branch to work on the side. So we'll use the command git checkout -b. Git Checkout allows you to select a branch and make it active, and the -b flag lets you create the branch at the same time. So I'll just call this Harvard. I'll make the branch. You'll notice on the right-hand side, it's updated. I'm on the Harvard branch. The next thing that I'm going to do here is open up my text editor. So I'm using Atom, which is GitHub's text editor. And I'm going to open up a file called header.html. So this is on every page of, let's see here. On every page of the site, you'll see we have this header. And it has like GitHub education link, a link to our forums, a link to some video tutorials, different stuff up here. And all of this is contained in this file. So I'm going to make a change to that. What I'm going to do is just copy this GitHub education link. And I'm going to just paste another copy of it and save it and refresh. And so now you see I have the link twice. We're editing the real, the local development environment. I'm going to go ahead and call this Harvard, and then I'm going to link to harvard.edu. Now, obviously, this isn't the feature that we really want in the app, but you could imagine that I'm making some new feature like the ability to grade assignments or the ability to invite people, or different kinds of things. The important part here is that we're doing some kind of development on the app in a branch on the side, and that we can discuss it and share it with people on GitHub. So I go ahead and save that. And the next thing that I'm going to do is go back to my terminal and do git status. Git status, I know you've covered some of Git in this course already, but git status, just as a refresher, tells you what's going on in your working directory and in your staging area, and what kind of the next thing you should do. So it gives you some pointers. It says right here, use git add file to update what will be committed. So what we need to do here is we need to use git add, and then app views shared header partial.html.erb. So what this is saying is I want to put this file that I've modified into my staging area and prepare it to be committed as a new commit in my repository on the Harvard branch. So I do that. Git status reports that it's modified. And then the last step here is to do git commit. When you commit, you include a message. And I'll say add a link to Harvard. I should probably check and make sure that the link actually works. If I click it, it does in fact take us to Harvard. All right. So now we've made our first commit on this new feature development that we're doing. And I want to show you a little bit about how to switch back and forth. So the first thing we did, we made a branch. We moved over to that branch. We made it active. We can, at the same time, use the command git checkout and specify a branch master to go back to our main line of development. This is the thing that's currently in production that everybody's using. I do that, and I refresh this page. And you'll see that the link to Harvard disappeared. It's not on this branch. If I go git checkout Harvard, and I refresh, it's now on this branch. And this is like pretty accurate as to how I would be working normally. I would make a branch, do some stuff, run it in development, see how it's going, and just keep checking things as I go until I get to the point where I'm like, yes, this is the thing I want. I want to push it out to production. It works. Now I need to get code review and run some unit tests to make sure that what I'm doing is right. So again, we started by forking the repository, and we had it in our own account. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to push it to my copy. I'm not going to push it to the main GitHub education copy. I'm going to push it to my copy. So what I'll do is say git push John D. Britton Harvard. And in this case, John D. Britton is the name of my remote that represents the repository, my fork of the repository. So it's here. It's this one. So that's what that means. So I'm going to push to that, and I'm going to push to the branch called Harvard. So this branch, I'm going to push it to a branch with the same name remotely. So you can see it pushes the code up to GitHub on my repository. And if I refresh the page on GitHub, you'll see that, let's see here. If I go to the home page, there you go. This yellow box says that less than a minute ago, I pushed a branch called Harvard to GitHub on my personal GitHub repository. And I can click this button here, compare and pull request. So I'll do that. What a pull request does is it lets you kind of start a conversation about some code, about some changes that you made. So in this case, I'm just going to say I want to add a link to Harvard. And up at the top, because this is a fork, you'll see it's saying I want to merge from my version of the repository on the Harvard branch to GitHub Education, the official version on the master branch. I'm going to change this just to be my own version. So I'm going to merge my Harvard branch into my own version's master branch, just because I don't actually want to deploy this to our production instance. So I'm going to add a link to Harvard like that, and just say, this is a simple example of feature branch development for the Harvard course. All right? And I can just say create pull request. What happens is it automatically starts a build. So it goes off to Travis, and it says, John made this branch. He made some new code. I want you to run all the tests. So what does that mean? Let's look at our tests. While this is kind of doing some stuff in the background, I'm going to hop over to my editor. And if we go here and go to spec. So in here we have, let's zoom in. Within our repository of this folder, so it's a Rails application. We're using our spec. all of our specifications, all of our unit tests are within this one folder called spec. We have all these different kinds of specs. We have controller specs, we have helpers, we have background job specs, we have model specs, service specs. And each one of these things, so if I say, for example, I'll go into my model specs, and I'll go in here and I'll check like the deadline specification. What this does is make sure that when a teacher sets a deadline, that we close down assignment submission on the deadline. And if somebody tries to submit, it gives an error. So there's all these different checks. In our case, our change was very minor. We just added a visual change. But we could have accidentally introduced some kind of bug, some kind of error. And so by running the tests, we're able to guarantee that nothing has changed. Nothing is broken. Nothing important has broken anyways, because we have tests for everything that's important. So there's hundreds and hundreds of these tests. They're all running. And if I go in here and click on the Travis CI link, and I go to our build, it's building on different versions of Ruby. So I'll open up this one. And you can kind of see it's setting all of our environment variables. It's installing all kinds of, all of our different, oops. There we go. So yeah, what it actually says here, we're not going to go through every one of these tests, obviously, but it's running all the tests. And then you can see as they run that they're passing, and it's kind of live updating. So this takes a couple of minutes. Once that's done, I'll get a green kind of status update on my repository, on the pull request, saying that, yes, in fact, this did pass all the tests, so you should feel very confident about deploying this to production. In the meantime, what would commonly happen is my coworkers would come in, or other people on the open source project would come in and review the changes. In our case, the change is rather trivial, so I'll just come in here and just say, like, this looks great, and I'll zoom in on that. This looks great. Let's ship it, right? Add a comment. And so we can collaborate on that. What would be pretty common to see here is, say you did something that might be a security concern. Somebody from your security team could come in and give comments about what you need to check, make sure that it's you're following best practices, kind of give you a second set of eyes so that you end up in a position where you're writing the best code you can. It's going to take a couple of minutes for this to run. So I want to jump back to the code. So we're going to cover a few things. We did branches. We made a pull request. We're doing an automated build. We got some review. And then we're going to talk about deploying. So every setup is different. How you're going to deploy your project. In our case, we use our chat tool. So we have a shared chat room thing. And every time we make a change, those changes get propagated to our chat tool as like kind of a notification. And then we can run a command in our chat client that says, we have a bot. His name's Hubot. And we tell Hubot, go deploy GitHub Classroom to production. And we can even specify, go deploy this branch of GitHub Classroom to production. So I could say, for example, where's my, here we go. So for example, in here, I could say, for example, deploy Classroom Harvard to production. I'm not going to run this right now, but essentially, if I wanted to deploy this out to production, that's exactly what I would do. And as you can see from before, I deployed Classroom, the master branch. Hubot replied to me that I was deploying. I got a success option, and then it said it was finished. So let's check in on Travis. OK, our build. Wait, this is not the right one. We had one build fail and one build pass. I don't know why we failed. This one will restart. All right. So anyways, we go back to, where did our thing go? Oh, I have to press the back button. I lost my tab. So if we go back here, anyways, this pull request build passed. So let's check that one out. So ultimately, we ran all of the tests. You can see them all passing here. So I feel pretty confident that the change I made by adding a link to the navigation, I didn't break anything. So I could go ahead and merge this into the master branch and be totally happy. However, this is a pretty common path to take when you're doing kind of smaller features. You build it, you test it, you make sure it works, you get code review, you put it out there. But what happens when you're doing like a really big feature? If you're doing release-based development, you might lump all of those changes together into one big release and say, this is the new release that supports this new thing. But when you're doing continuous deployment with a web application, you can't really do that. It's diverging from the production version is your enemy. The longer you have a branch open where you're making changes, and not reintegrating that back to the main line of development, the harder you're making your life for the future. So what we like to do is use feature toggles. So we'll create a kind of a break, a logical break in the code where you can choose 2 code paths based on certain variables. And that allows us to deploy new features to the public production version of our website or our app without impacting all of our users immediately. So practically speaking, what does this mean? This means that I want to be able to deploy this new feature that links to Harvard to production, but I want it to be disabled by default. So I want nobody to see it. I just want that code to be in production and ready to go whenever I need it. And I want to be able to enable it for one person at a time. So I want to be able to say, when John accesses this web page, then it will show, it should show the Harvard link. But when anybody else accesses it, it should not. So that's called a feature toggle, and I'm going to show you how we kind of build those and deploy them into production. So I'll go back to my header, and it's pretty straightforward. We have one line here, this line number 7, which links out to Harvard. What we want to do is add a conditional around it. The conditional should be based off of the current user, and it should be based off of if the Harvard feature is enabled or not enabled. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use some Ruby syntax to say I'm writing logic code. And I will say if current user dot feature enabled question mark, and then I'll call the feature Harvard. Right? Simple if statement. If the feature is enabled, I want to link to Harvard. And that's it. And then I just say end to end the statement. If the feature is not enabled, do nothing. OK, so I'll save that. Now if I go back to my browser and go to my local copy, you can tell that this is my local copy because it's got this red bar across the top, which is kind of development mode for us. And you can see the Harvard link is here. If I refresh this page, it's gone. OK, that's because the feature is not enabled. Up here in the top, there's this site admin button. This links into kind of a back end for developers who work on this app. So if you're a developer working on the open source version of this app, you would have access to this through your copy of the app. Or if you were a GitHub staff employee working on the production version, you'd be able to access this as well. Within this interface, we link out to this thing called features. Right? And features, this tool is actually an open source Ruby gem called Flipper. So it's GitHub Flipper. So here's the gem. If you're interested in building apps that have feature flippers and you're using Rails, this is definitely a thing to check out. It's probably too in-depth for me to go into all of how this works, but we didn't build everything that I'm showing you uniquely for this app. Every Rails app that we use has the ability to do this feature flipper thing through a third-party library. In JavaScript, there are other libraries that do this. Different frameworks have different libraries for this kind of thing. This is a common pattern in deploying production web applications. And also desktop applications. We do this in some of our desktop apps as well. So anyways, I'll click on the features toggle, and it says there are no features. You need to add a feature. So I'll go in here and click Add Feature, and I'll call it Harvard right here. And then click Add Feature. And now I have this nice interface that shows me ways to enable the feature. I can enable the feature for a percentage of actors. That means if you have 100 users, enable it for one in every 100, two out of every 100. What's interesting about percentage of actors is that that is based off of the fact that when a feature is enabled for a given user, it stays enabled for that user all the time. It's very important that if somebody goes to your website and the feature is enabled on one page and they navigate to the next page, it shouldn't disappear. So you can think about this as taking like a numerical ID for the user and doing like mod something. And if it has a remainder or not, it's enabled. So for a given user, it will always be enabled or not be enabled. The other option is percentage of time. This allows the feature to be enabled basically for every request, 1 request out of 100. So for the same user, it might be enabled sometimes. It might not be. It just depends on what you're implementing. And then lastly, there's individual groups and individual actors. So I can enable a feature just for one user or just for one group. Since this is my development environment, I know my user ID is 1. So I'm just going to enable this for user 1. So I'll just enter this in here. Right? Click Add Actor. And now the feature is partially enabled. You can see it's yellow. And if I switch back, where did my thing go? Oh, I have to go back here. If I switch back to my local host and load the page, you'll see that now the Harvard link is here. Now I'll open up a separate window, incognito window, and I'll go localhost 5000. And this time I'll log in as a different user. Uh-oh, what did I do? Oh, let's disable this feature. What did I do here? Let's do this. I'll log in as a different user. And then in this case, I just have like a student, like a test account. I'll authorize this. So now I'm logged in this browser window, which has the gray bar, as a different user. I'll go back to my code and fix that. And for this user, you'll notice that the Harvard link is not enabled. But for this user, the Harvard link is enabled. So I basically have a feature toggle in there that allows me to specifically say which users get what. Why is this useful? This can be very useful if you do, when you're making new features, you can enable it just for your friends. Or you can enable it just for people who work at your company. Or you can enable it just for beta testers. So what this means is, like, the problem we were trying to solve before is that you can diverge from your main line of development. And the longer you stay diverging and you keep spreading apart, the harder it is to reintegrate your code later. This means that you can add a feature toggle, put in an unfinished feature or a beta feature, merge it in, and every time you improve it, just make a new pull request, a new branch, doing it bit by bit by bit, and you're always reintegrated. So you never have this big, scary day where you say, we made this huge new feature for the app. Now we have to integrate it with all the other work all the other developers have been doing. It's been integrated all along. So now you just click a button and it's enabled. Then once you're happy with the feature and you know it's been working well, you can delete the code that lets you choose 2 paths and let it just have 1 path. So if we go back to our feature toggle board and click on Harvard, I'll disable it for my user. And instead, I will enable it 50% of the time. So if I go to my, my private user and I refresh, it's not there the first request, not there the second request. Oh, there it is. Now you see it showed up right here. If I refresh it again, it might disappear. Eventually it comes back. So 50% of the requests. And that's true across all users. So if I go to my normal account, it would do that as well. Put it to 0. And then ultimately, you can just click Enable here, and it will enable for everybody. All the time, enabled for everyone. So now we're able to create a feature flag, push it out to production, and see it in action. So here we go. In my case, what I want to do is look at the code. We're happy with this feature toggle. Then we say git status. We have modified this file. We'll do git add app views shared header. And then git commit, which says enable Harvard feature behind a feature flag. All right, and lastly, I'll say git push John D. Britton Harvard. So this will push it up to my forked copy of the repository. And then that will run the builds again. I'll run all the unit tests again, make sure that it's good. Now, I'm also going to go ahead and push this. I'm not going to create a pull request for this on the main public project, but I do want to show you how deploying works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say git. I want to do this in here. I need to add one more thing. If current user and. So I need this line because you saw that error I got before. Because I was logged out, I wasn't a current user, so I caused the app to crash. I don't want to cause our production app to crash, so I'm going to add this if current user, and if the feature is enabled, then do this thing. Otherwise, if there's nobody logged in, don't do anything, or if the feature is not enabled, don't do anything. So git add, what's it called? Git status, git add app views shared header, git commit -m, check for current user, git push Harvard, and I'm also going to do git push origin Harvard. So in this case, I'm actually going to push the change up to the real production applications repository. And then what will happen is if I go in here, you'll see in my chat. So this is really important to the way GitHub works and the way we work with teams. You can see I created the branch, and I got a notification in the chat room. All of the other people on my team also got this notification, and they'll see it in the chat room. What's interesting is like I'm doing all this work on my command line. You can all watch, and you can see it because I'm screen sharing. But my coworkers can't see any of the commands I'm running. The reason we have all of this stuff published out to our chat channel is because it gives visibility into what commands we're running to the entire group. So by using Hubot and using a chat tool, we're able to have kind of a shared command line where people can see what's happening in the deployment process. So in our chat tool, I can run CI build classroom Harvard. And what that's going to do is it's going to say, go to my CI tool. Uh-oh. Uh-oh, that's not good. Well, it runs automatically as well. GitHub.com, education, classroom. If I go here, now you'll notice this is not the forked version of the repository. This is the actual version of the repository. I can go to this branch, and I'll see the Harvard branch, and you can see the build is pending on Travis. So I can click this and see what's happening. Once this build finishes, I'll be able to actually deploy this out to production and try it out. So while this is building, does anybody in the audience have any questions while we wait for this for a sec? No? Yes, in the back.
When you said your command line was pushed out to the chat, I didn't see what you meant by the command line.
Yeah. So the question was about my command line being in the chat tool. It's actually not that the command line is in the chat tool, but what I wanted to show is that while I was working on my command line, all my Git commands, they were private to me. Nobody could see them. But when it comes to deploying a product, deploying a service, it's important for the team to be in communication and know what's going on. So we don't actually deploy from our command line. We deploy from chat. So I'm about to demonstrate that as soon as the builds finish. But I'll be able to go into our chat room. Actually, I can do it with the master branch while this builds. So I can go to our chat tool. And I can say, OK, you can see the build was successful. But I can say, for example, deploy classroom master. So I'm going to deploy the master branch of my app to production. And so now when I do this, everybody on my team can see that I'm currently doing deployment. Nobody else can deploy. The deploy queue is locked. And you can see that my deployment is done. It went out to production. I literally just deployed the app to production as we were talking. But everybody else in the team can see that I'm doing this. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool.
And who set up those, are those hooks that are set up?
Yeah, so this is all set up via Hubot. So it's an open source tool you could use to kind of set up your own thing. There's also this thing called the GitHub app, which it's a Slack integration. You could enable this for your Slack, which is giving us all these notifications. All right. So now we can see right here, it says Travis CI build successful, education classroom ref Harvard. So this is the branch that this Harvard branch is the one that I just made. So we can actually deploy it now. So I'm going to go ahead and deploy it to production. So deploy classroom Harvard. Now hopefully I don't break the whole thing. It's deploying. And then once it's finished, I can actually go to the public GitHub Classroom website and take a look. Presumably nothing has changed because we didn't actually change anything in the we didn't turn the feature toggle on. So we just put some code out there that's now integrated with our code base, but it's not publicly, it's not running for anybody. And then we'll go and enable it and kind of walk through those steps. Takes a moment. So in the meantime, while it's doing that, I'll kind of walk through. Oh, it's finished. There we go. John's production deployment of Harvard is done. Great. Took 80 seconds. So I can say classroom.github.com. App is running. It's not broken. I can sign in. You can see my normal classroom. There's no link about any of this stuff. Because I'm a staff member, I can go in here and click on this and go to the features thing. You can see we have some real features in here about deadlines, student identifiers, different kinds of features we've been adding recently. I can add a feature called Harvard. And then I can enable it for user 1. And now if I go to classroom.github.com, you'll see, did I break it? Maybe I'm not user 1. We'll enable it for staff instead. Oh no. Well, the live demo failed for this, but I will, you should believe me, it does work. We saw it work in development, so I'm just going to go ahead and do deploy classroom master and put things back how they were. So that unlocked production. It redeployed the master branch out there. And this is actually like, the demo didn't work, but it's a very similar experience to what would normally happen. I would test it on my local environment. It would work. I'd have my tests run. The build would succeed. I would deploy it. I would go out and test it, make sure nothing's broken. If something's broken, I redeploy master. I go back into my development environment and try and figure out what's wrong. I don't know what I did wrong, but I'm not going to debug that right now. So yeah, that's basically the standard flow going from just taking an open source project or a project working on with coworkers, doing a feature branching model, committing that stuff, sending it up to GitHub, and then deploying it. I think what we didn't do in the case of deploying to production, which I just wanted to reduce the amount of noise for my collaborators, was normally what I would have done is made a pull request in the production repo, had a discussion about the feature, but then that would create noise for the hundreds of people who are on that repository. So I just kind of went around that for demo purposes. But like we did on my fork, we could do a whole conversation about what the features were and how it worked. So yeah, that's what I had for that stuff. I wanted to go and offer up the opportunity for some questions around kind of this flow, why we might choose certain things. So I'd kind of throw it out to you all. No takers? There we go.
Can you recommend a good resource for, because I see there's a lot of components in here and a lot of setup.
Yeah.
Required to have all of this working.
Like the end-to-end thing?
Like is there like a book or like does GitHub?
So I don't know about a book. I would point to Travis, which you're going to hear about next, as like kind of the go-to place. I mean, there's other tools. I like Travis, but there's other tools out there. But go to them, and you can basically see how to set all this stuff up. What's cool about it too is I'll just show you my Travis CI account for this. So I can go to my Travis CI account, and basically I can list all of my GitHub repositories, and I just click a checkbox, and it just automatically works. If you have any of the standard like frameworks. So say you're using a Rails app or a Node app, or basically every language kind of framework combo has a testing system. If you use the standard thing, all you need to do is have one point of entry to run the tests. So in our case, we do everything in scripts, and we have script CI build. And that's just, if you have that one file that will run the test, then Travis can figure everything out automatically. And you don't have to configure GitHub at all. You just log into Travis, you click the button, and Travis configures GitHub for you. And yeah, I think that's the best way to get started, is like go through their guides on CI/CD. There's also, I guess I should plug this as well, developer.github.com. So if you want to be a bit more sophisticated, I know a lot of teachers are using this stuff for their, for like kind of customizing the way that they have workflows for their students and stuff. But if you want to use this for your own projects and you want to customize it, you can just go to developer.github.com, check out the API docs, and specifically this section here on webhooks. What that does is it gives you basically a way to listen to events happening on github.com and respond to them. So the most common event that people listen to is the push event. Anytime somebody pushes code to GitHub, GitHub will send a web request to a URL of your choosing and notify them of what's changed. And then you can build an integration that does all kinds of stuff. So that's like, if you want to get more custom, I would start on developer.github.com. If you want to have just the standard thing, go to like Travis or another one of those services. And I should repeat the question, I guess, or is that, yeah. The question that answered was, is there a resource where I can get started? Yeah.
Just trying to understand your deployment flow right there.
Yep.
You are sending a message from Slack to Qbot, which is running some kind of script, which is kicking off your tests to Travis, and then deploying.
Well, the tests happen first. So the question was, I want to understand the deployment flow, like what are the steps and what are the pieces? So first, we write the code. And we get the code hosted on GitHub. Then when the code gets pushed to GitHub, GitHub uses webhooks to trigger a build. That's all automatic. I don't do anything. Once the build is finished, or even before the build is finished, I can go into our chat channel. And that's actually one channel, Education Ops. It's all about this education stuff. And I just say, period, deploy, and the name of the app. And we have Hubot in the room listening to commands. So any person who's authorized to use Hubot, if they type a command in the channel, everybody can see it, and Hubot sees it. And when Hubot sees it, that triggers a flow for Hubot. Hubot doesn't actually do the deploying. So this app in particular is hosted on Heroku. So what Hubot does is it tells Heroku to get this new version of the app and have it be deployed into our production pipeline. So Hubot is kind of like a little bit of glue there. And the part we need Hubot for is so that we can do it in the chat room. I could do this without being in the chat room. I could do it automatically when I deploy. And in fact, if I made a pull request with the changes and I just clicked merge and I didn't talk to anybody about it, as long as the build passed, it would get deployed to production automatically without even talking to Hubot. When I said that you can actually deploy before the build passes, what will happen is if you type in deploy the app name before before it passes, then what will happen is Hubot will wait until the build passes. If the build fails, Hubot will tell you, sorry, your build failed, fix your problems. Or your build succeeded, I'm deploying your app now. So it kind of always does that. Another kind of interesting component about that whole flow is GitHub is getting to be a larger company. There are a lot of engineers there, a lot of people working on GitHub.com. There can be kind of a limitation on the number of people who can be deploying at one time. So we've kind of developed like a queuing system where it's like you get in line for your deployment. So there's basically GitHub is like constantly being deployed, like nonstop, just deploy, 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 deploy. Whenever your the first deployment finishes, Hubot notifies the next person and starts their deploy, and there's just a whole process. So they're always getting out there as fast as possible. Do we have any other questions from folks?